Hey, welcome back to our show. Guys, if you or your kids struggle putting your foot in your mouth or making decisions without really considering the outcome or blurting out or making snap judgments or have problems with planning or prioritizing or time management, this episode is for you. We have a doctor of occupational therapy on our show today. So, welcome to the Families of Character show, Carrie Schmitt.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Guys, Carrie grew up in Georgia. She's a Georgia girl. She has her bachelor's in occupational therapy from the Medical College of Georgia, as well as a doctor of occupational therapy from Boston University. And she has been in this field for 20 some years, and she and her husband and four kids have moved around the country, and she's worked in a variety of different pediatric settings, including in Georgia, New York, South Carolina, and Colorado. And currently, Carrie is in my backyard here in Denver with a private practice, and she splits her time between serving the pediatric occupational therapy clients of our community, teaching other practitioners throughout the United States about sensory processing and integration, and then writing research papers as well. So, Carrie, you like to read, you love warm chocolate chip cookies, and you've got a golden retriever too, right?
That's right.
We're so glad to have you on the show. Listen, those characteristics that I kind of put out there at the beginning, I think all of us could say that at some point in our life, we've struggled with one or all of those. And so I just thought maybe we could start out by talking about like, what are those characteristics? Are those what we call or have heard of as executive function skills?
Yes. So, executive function is a set of brain based skills, and they're required for us to really perform and tasks and skills throughout our day. And really, they're a set of skills that allow everyone to focus our attention on the right things, to monitor our actions, to make mistakes and use feedback to adjust. And so, these are skills that they are present throughout our lifetime. They are developing in childhood, but we can also develop them as adults. They're not really necessarily skills that are child specific, although they develop in that time period. Instead, they are a set of skills that just allow us to function at our highest contribution throughout the day. I think, as you pointed out earlier, what happens is in family life, a lot of times there are a lot of challenges in our scheduling and things like that that reveal, executive skill challenges, but those same situations can reveal executive skill strengths. And so I really like to think about it both ways, that children and adults have executive skills and they have challenges and they have strengths. And if we think about it that way, from a strengths-based approach, we can think about how to develop our challenges and how to use our strengths to really function at a high level.
That's such good news. So there's hope. If we struggle with these things, even as adults, that there are ways that we can improve upon these and constantly be sharpening these executive function skills.
That's right. I mean, there's neuroplasticity across the lifespan, and we know that now, which means we can make brain changes and lay down new neural pathways across the lifespan. And we want to take advantage of certain developmental periods to develop these skills in our children because they have particular developmental periods where there's a ton of brain growth. And so there are great times in your life to develop these skills. What most people think is that this just happens. But what we're learning from tons of research in this area is that these skills have to be taught. They do not develop naturally. And so I think we're going to have a conversation today about like, what are those skills? How do we develop them? And what are some of the critical developmental periods that we might want to take advantage of to work on some of these skills?
I love it. Let's dive right in. I mean, where do you want to start with the developmental stages? Is it best to start kind of infancy, 0 to 3, somewhere around that stage?
There definitely are skills that are developing in that time frame because of course there's a rapid growth in the brain in the 0 to 3. We know that to be true. We know early intervention is super impactful for a lot of people. I think there's a pain point for most families a little bit older in childhood, because we do a lot of the tasks and care for the younger children. And then as the children get a little bit older, we would like to pass some of that responsibility onto them. And so sometimes I think if a parent's listening, they might say, well, the 0 to 3, I'm not so worried about. I've got that. Or I know how to handle the complex tasks that are in that developmental period. I'm struggling with my 8-year-old or my 12-year-old. And I definitely think that's pretty relatable. There is a second period of rapid brain development that happens in adolescence, and it mirrors the rapid brain development of the 0 to 3 time frame. And so I actually think that middle school is one of the greatest time frames to work on developing these skills.
Oh man, when you were talking about that, like 8, 12, 13, teenagers, it just reminded me. I had a little flashback of one of our kids when he was in 5th grade. It was like, he's not handing in his assignment. I know he's starting it, but he's not finishing it, and it never makes it to my inbox. And it's like, man, what are you doing? You're putting in all this work, but it doesn't get to the teacher. That's like the most important part, right? And so let's talk about that time period of adolescence, because I think, if someone just started listening to this episode and was like, putting my foot in my mouth, making decisions without, considering the outcome, blurting out, having a hard time managing time, they might think that this is an episode all about someone who has diagnosable ADHD or ADD. But you're saying that it's not exclusive to that particular diagnosis, but that problems with executive function skills are in adolescence. Like, it's a primary time that kids have difficulty with this set of skills. And then there's other areas in our life too where we might have trouble kind of with these particular things.
Yes, yes, all of that. ADHD, if you have ADHD, you have a likelihood of having some executive skill challenges. But to your point, we all use executive skills now and throughout all stages of our development. And there are times when our executive skills are challenged. So if we're going to talk about it developmentally, then we think about what we're asking students to start doing in 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. There's an increased demand on their skill set. And so if we see a lagging skill, sometimes, as you mentioned, like, oh, we're doing our homework, we're not turning it in. What's happening? We left our sweatshirt at school 3 times this week. We packed a lunch and left it in the fridge. Like, I think parents fast forward to like, I'm not raising an adult. Like, how are they ever going to leave my home if their lunch is in the fridge and they've forgotten it, right? And so what we have to look at is like, yes, that's happening, and it could be an underlying difference in how their executive skills are developing. And there are things that we can do to build that executive skill. It's like, get curious about, is there a pattern here? Could we think of this? Is there a memory issue? Is there a task initiation and completion issue? Are these specific things that are starting to bother us? Do they fall into a particular category? And if they do, then maybe we would want to think about, how do we build that skill? Because it's clearly lagging, and it's not something that's never going to show up, but it is something that we can address proactively instead of just staying frustrated about it.
Oh, this is such good news, because I'm thinking about the differences in my kids. And for example, I can tell one of my kids like 4 things to do. First this, then this, and finally this.
Mhm.
The other one can handle 2 of those, and then the second one probably isn't going to get done, because when they go to do the first one, something happens in the processing or the brain where it, there's a distraction, and all of a sudden we're out in the backyard playing instead of doing the next task I've asked them to do. So, is this kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, I mean, what you're identifying is that one of your children has strengths in one area that your other child might have a challenge in. I actually really challenge parents to start with themselves, to do an executive skills profile, see what your own strengths and challenges are, and then do some studying about those strengths and those challenges. I really like the series called Smart But Scattered. Um, and they do offer an executive skills profile. So you can do their executive skills profile, and sometimes personalizing the learning is really a really good idea to find out, like, how do I show up? How is my task initiation? How is my emotional control? Thinking about yourself and the executive skills that you have in display and how you have in display them can be really great way to learn. So it's Dr. Peg Dawson and Dr. Richard Garr, I think is how you say the name. And they are PhD scientists who have studied executive function for a really long time. And it's a wonderful series. They also have series specific to different life periods, which I think is great. And so I would highly recommend kind of thinking about your own strengths and challenges, because one thing you might notice is that the frustration points that you have with your own children, if they're not doing something like forgetting to hand in an assignment, or maybe forgetting something at school all the time, or being disorganized, you might find out that that's a strength for you and it's a challenge for them. And so you're realizing, oh my gosh, my frustration is because I have a strength there and they have a challenge there, and there's a mismatch. It's not necessarily like a character flaw, it's
Yes.
just that they have a challenge and I have a strength. And no wonder I'm so frustrated in that way. So it's like, maybe I could use my strength to teach them how to have that skill.
That makes so much sense, and I love how you said, as a parent, you can start with yourself by assessing your own executive skills and doing that profile. I didn't even know that was something that was out there and available. So you said it's called Smart But Scattered. Peg Dawson and Richard Darr. We could do our own assessment to find out where are our strengths, where could we help our kids with some of their weaknesses. And then also, I think it would be so valuable to understand our own executive weaknesses, because it also helps us to empathize with like our spouse. Like, what is it that probably frustrates them about us because of our weakness in one particular area? And how could we have more compassion with them, and in these, certain situations where we kind of butt heads? Why can't you get this? Or, man, I've asked you to remember this 100 times. Like, what
Yes,
is this not important? And it's like, no, this may just be a weakness. So
that's
I
right.
love that the executive skills profile that we
Yep.
could do to understand ourselves better helps us understand our kids better.
My husband and I did it, and we were not surprised by the strengths. I think, once you've been married for a long time, you can do these things and you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely one of your strengths. But to your point, like, it can give you a little bit more of an objective viewpoint of what's going on in a situation you might be frustrated with. And if it's just a lagging skill, or if a challenge exists in a specific skill, then you feel like, oh, we could do something about that, right? Instead of staying subjectively upset, and feeling, frustrated with the person, you could just say, oh gosh, look at that. There's a lagging skill. Maybe we could work on that. And then it'd be better for us relationally. And that can be extended, from the couple to the children, inside the family. It gives you a language maybe to start, like a jumping off point if you have your own profile, to start the conversation and start getting curious about how the different people in your household operate.
Yes, and I love how that aligns also with just I don't know, kind of a theory that I've had for years, like just diagnosing someone or putting a label on them often just pigeonholes them and then creates a lot of shame-based monologue in their head, right? I'm never going to be good at organizing things, or I'm always forgetful, or we could even call our kids like, oh, forgetful Jones, he's forgotten again. And it develops this sort of identity for the child. And then they just feel like, well, that's just who I am. So I should never be expected to remember things or to plan for something or to be looking ahead at the future. And so then it just kind of limits their capacity for growth or being able to function at their highest level. So I like this idea of like we're all on this spectrum of executive function skills, and some we have great strengths in and others it's going to be a weakness, but that you're saying that there are certain things or exercises or games that we could play or things that we can engage in that could actually bolster those weaknesses and even make them into, a strength or bring us up to par.
That's right. That's right. And I believe that's true that a lot of adults had a message given to them as a child that they have come to believe about themselves. And I worry mostly about the self-talk, right? And the lack of compassion that they would have. They might beat themselves up. So I always forget. Oh, I'm just so forgetful. I'm not mechanical. I'm not artistic. Whatever the thing was that was said to them. And that to your point is very limiting. It's a limiting belief. And it's not true of executive skills. You can develop them. And, there's sometimes in relationship where there is a particular thing that would be really supportive for you to develop, to be better, a better partner, a better parent, whatever it is. And so we know that through neuroplasticity, we can practice something. And the truth is, play is actually a great way to build executive skill. Like, we don't have enough play in our life. And it's a very good way overall to build executive skills across the board.
Oh, I want to hear more about this. I interviewed a speech pathologist, Erin Hanberger, on our show a few episodes ago, and she was talking about this too from a speech perspective, that play is a great way to engage language and just start activating the body so that the mind can kind of catch up as well. So, talk about play and maybe some of the things that we could do in the home setting to help with executive function skills, just through creative play and allowing more of that in the day.
Yeah, I think play is really powerful. And if you look into the research on it, it really is a driver of development. But most recently, we're understanding that it's a driver of interpersonal neurobiology. So it's a driver of connection. And we believe that we're created and wired for connection, for relationship with others. And so if there's something that drives development and drives connection, like, I'm all in, right? And so play is such a great way, in part because it's a context, right? We can do things in play, we can assume characteristics, we can do things playfully, we can experiment, and it's less maybe threatening or I'm not sure what the word would be, but it's more accepted to have a wide range of things. Like, we could play with voice volume, or we could play with emotion, or we could play with characters. And that would be allowed in the context of play. And you could say, oh, well, Batman used his foam sword to do such and such. And it was Batman that used too much force, not the child, right? And so
Yes.
it's like, oh, Batman used too much force. And it feels like a correction in the context of a character and not quite so personal to the child, right? And so we can do, if we notice a cluster of differences in how they're performing, and we think, goodness, you know what, there's a pattern here, then we could take that to play and say, like, what game, it could be from a tabletop game to a bigger body movement game, could we use. So like, think about organization, for example. There are so many, like, group games that require collective organization. You could even um, think about this when you're trying to do a family task, like get out the door to go do something fun, even, right? Like, everybody in on organization, scavenger hunts. Okay, we got to think, like, what of these things on our list are similar and might be located in a similar area? Or which ones would we want to prioritize getting first because there's a limited amount of them? That's a game, that you're having to apply some executive skill of organization or time management to. And so you can see there that like skill is built, but it's built in the context of a game and play.
Yes. So you don't have to be sitting down in a very therapeutic environment and doing testing and quizzing on these skills. It's like you could weave them in and gamify them, right? At home. I love your example of just getting out the door on time, right? We've got 5 minutes before we have to leave to get to school on time. So what things do we have left to do? And what are the most important and what might need to be just left for later if
Yes.
we're able to?
And letting children as they get older into that thinking and into that process helps them develop that skill as well. There's so many strategies that we can use with them to train them. I mean, in the bigger picture of how to work on skills like this, you would think of a model of like, I do, we do, you do, right? And it's like when they're younger, I do it. I do a lot of it, right? But when it's time for them to take some responsibility, we do it together. And then at the very end, you hope that they could do it independently. Now, will they do it perfectly? No. Will they still possibly need some skill development and coming back alongside them? Sure. You can think about this like I was having a conversation with a bunch of moms recently about chores. And I think the I do, we do, you do is very applicable to something like that. We're having chores because we're contributing members to this household. And this household runs a certain way, and we want everyone to contribute. And so, in order to have it run well, in order to have clean dishes for the next meal, we need everyone to pitch in and do your contribution. And so sometimes it's like, I'm going to do the dishes. Now I'm going to bring you alongside of me and show you this is the way that you load a dishwasher. You stack the dishes over here, you rinse them. The cups go here, the plates go here, the silverware goes here. And you do that several times until they're independent enough, or maybe you stand and supervise, right? And then it's a you do, and they can do it. And that's also the way that you teach any skill developmentally, but it's a way that you could teach executive skills too, which is again why the profile is so important, because oftentimes we're expecting our children to have a skill set that we ourselves are not modeling. And so if
Mm.
we have a weakness, let's say in response inhibition, maybe we tend to be impulsive. You said blurting or putting my foot in my mouth, right?
Yes.
If I am not practicing good response inhibition, if I am the parent on the sidelines, losing it with the ref, and then I expect my child to be the player on the field that does hold back, like I'm not modeling that well. But if I have a self-awareness around that, right, then I can work on my response inhibition to model it well. Then I can ask them to actually have the same skill set.
Yes, again, such a great value to have that knowledge and that self-awareness going into this where you're like, "Oh, yep, that's an issue I've always struggled with, so I'm going to look for those opportunities with my kids, see if they're doing some of the same things I'm doing, and then help them to overcome that response inhibition or to be able to hold back and regulate their emotions in situations like that." I love it. And I just love the idea that very memorable, I do it, we do it, you do it. Because I think part of my story as a mom, who is working, had my own private practice, my husband's working, all of our kids are in school. For me, I kind of did the I do it for far too long.
Mm.
And then what happened was I just burn out. I became resentful because I just kept doing things for my kids. And I think when I got, resentful was like I'm looking at them, they're 6, 7, 8, and I'm like, "You don't have your lunch in your backpack? You don't have all the things that you need for class? We're going out the door." And they're kinda looking at me, and looking back, I think, "Well, it's because I hadn't trained them up to do those things." I hadn't brought them aside with me for the we do it part. So it was I do it, and then all of a sudden I'm looking at them and going, "You are tall enough and big enough by now that you should just have this figured out."
Yes.
But we
Yes.
missed that step.
Gosh. Yeah, I think that one of the reasons I think that this starts peaking in frustration and around that middle school age for a lot of people is because we think bigger bodies mean full ability. And like you're saying, I skipped the we do. Like it was all an I did, and now I want you to do. And I skipped we do. I skipped teaching you how to do it. And, it does take effort, it does take time. And sometimes we feel like it's quicker for us to do it. But if our goal is to raise adults who contribute to a partnership, to their place of employment, and feel good about themselves, right? Because
Yes.
self esteem is certainly tied to this, then it is part of our imperative that we would train those things. And so, like, maybe I haven't had them pick up their room because I feel like they don't do it the way I would do it. That's skipping we do. I haven't trained them to do it the way that I think is a clean room. I haven't thought about could I make a checklist? Could I do pictures of what a clean room looks like? Could I take a picture of their room as a clean room and say, for me, this is what a clean room looks like? And the checklist is the bed is made and the floor is picked up and the laundry's in the hamper or whatever your clean is. Have we trained them to what we believe is 100% ready to walk out the door? And 100% ready to walk out the door is your backpack has a water bottle, has a lunch, has your homework inside, is by the front door, and like it could be helpful to say, what percent ready are you? And have them kind of say, let me go check based on a checklist or based on what I know is 100%. It's like, what does done look like? Is another great question for parents. What does it look like when we are ready? What does it look like when we are done? And then what
Yes.
supports do we need? Because these are lifetime supports. It's if you start a new job, your executive function is going to be challenged in a new environment and a new role. And so maybe you start a new job and you need different things to be ready for your day. And so you might have a bag by the front door and you might have made yourself a little sticky note that's a reminder, at this job, I need this, or I now wear scrubs or I now wear a uniform. And so I need 5 uniforms so that I have the uniforms for the week. This is across a lifespan, right? So we might go back to some of these learning supports when we're in a novel situation or a challenging situation. You think about when you're getting ready to move, or if you're in the month of May, and it's just a lot. You might need a sticky note on your dashboard that says, get gas today. Don't
Right.
forget. You might think, oh, I'm going to do that return tomorrow. And right now I'm going to go put it in the car because in the morning I won't remember. That's an executive skill strategy that you learned somewhere along the way that you could teach your kid, but is also really helpful in adulthood.
So true. I'm thinking of all the little things that I do for myself on a daily basis. My husband will often walk into the room in the morning and he'll see a coffee cup in the middle of our bedroom floor. And he's like, oh, you want to take that downstairs and put it in the sink. That's why you put it there. And I'm like, yes, because it's a visual cue to me. Anything I want to take out of my room and downstairs, I put in this spot on my, bedroom floor where I might kick it as I'm walking out. And so if I might kick it, it brings to mind that something needs to be done with this. And so you're right. Just the idea of setting our kids up to succeed with a little checklist. What do I need to do to be fully ready for school? It's so important for us to give our kids those tools to build the skills because, like you said, these are tools we're going to circle back and use at different points in our life forever. Right? I mean, when you go on a trip, you have to make a packing list as an adult. It's not like, well, because I'm 45, I know exactly everything I need to take for this trip to Chicago.
Mhm.
No, we still require lists and reminders so that partially we don't get overwhelmed by just keeping it all in our mind and keeping it upstairs instead of ejecting it where we can do something about this. So I love the
And
idea. It's not
this
it's not a deficiency that your kid needs a checklist or pictures of what done right means. It's actually a tool and it's preparing them for what they're going to do for themselves later on.
Yeah, and like likely your strategies evolved from a particular time in which you were challenged. If we have a lot going on, we'll see, drops in our cognitive ability. Times of grief, times of stress. They will require so much of our emotional and social and cognitive energies and really resources that we will sometimes lose some of these skill sets too, right? And so we should be gentle with ourselves as adults in difficult time periods as well. So likely you discovered I put things in the middle of the floor because you were finding that you were having a hard time remembering and you were getting frustrated with yourself by having to go back up or having too much collect in your room.
Yes.
And so there are, sometimes we grow through those periods of when we have a challenge or when we have less ability to do something. We develop a strategy. And, this is not a character flaw, it's a lagging skill. And, we really just have to think about, I think one thing that might be helpful to parents is when you're thinking about a particular child or a spouse right now, you might be thinking like, okay, I have this frustration point. I've heard it in this context of this conversation, or I've extrapolated and I've kind of figured it out. Sometimes what we can do is we're like, okay, there's a concern there or something that's caught my attention. And you might want to look at it and say, is this a lack of skill or is this a lack of performance? And a skill is knowing how to do something. And a performance is being able to do it in the context. So, like, I can go out and I can shoot foul shots in my driveway over and over and over and over. And I can build a skill in where I have a routine and I have a way that I stand and I have a way that I shoot and I've built my success. Now I'm supposed to take that and so put it in context of a basketball game. And I'm supposed to shoot free throws on a foul line with a ref with a whistle, with people lined up on either side, with a gym with a lot of noise, possibly a crowd behind the backboard. And I'm supposed to take that skill and I'm supposed to perform it in
Mhm.
context. And so, oftentimes we can say, oh, we have that skill, but we only have it here. We can't translate it into performance. Or maybe the skill isn't there. We need to reverse and kind of build that skill and then take it to different contexts.
Ooh, good point. So you might have a skill down, but when it comes to performing it, you've got to bridge that gap. So how do you work on that from having the skill in kind of a protected environment to employing that skill to perform?
Yeah. So if somebody tells you to work on that, a lot of times as a parent, I'm like, okay, like, but what does that mean? Right? Like, how do I work on that? Like, okay,
Yes.
great. Like your teacher will be like, oh my gosh, they really need to work on organization. And you're like, I don't, okay, but how do I work on something? And
Yes.
this is for everybody, not just your children, but how do we work on things? Professionals, we think about working on things in three ways. We think about how to modify, how to accommodate, and how to remediate. Okay, so when we modify something, it means we're changing the task or we're changing the environment. And modification is an example of like, I have to put my coffee cup in the middle of the floor to remember to take it down. I have to put my purse by the front door. I have to go put my return in the car. I've modified the task or the environment to set myself up for support. Sometimes we need accommodations. And accommodations occur most often in the context of learning, where we know there's a learning difference or a challenge, and we're asking for an accommodation. An accommodation can look like I need more time to process, I need a different way to take notes. I need expanded time for test taking because I know how my brain works and my brain needs an accommodation. And then we have remediation. And remediation is that going back and targeting that skill, getting really specific, looking for games, for play, for, reading about the skill, whatever it is that we need to go back and do. And I do have like a series of emails, and it defines each executive skill. And then it does give recommendations. Like if it's a strength, it might look like this. If it's a weakness, it might look like this. But also there's specific games that you can use to build each skill, which might be fun for families for the summer. I know I always invest in some games over the summer to keep our kids busy. And the other thing I want to say about that is a lot of times we can expect for partnering with an education partner like a school, we can expect the school to modify and to accommodate, but really schools are not set up to remediate. And so if you're thinking that there is a lagging skill and that there is some remediation, targeted extra support strategies needed, that is really on the caregiver.
Okay, so if you're in a situation where they've modified, they've kind of changed the environment, they've given some accommodations, and then you do find that, well, this is just a skill we need to go back and really learn kind of from the get-go, that remediation piece, then is that where a parent would engage someone like yourself, like an occupational therapist, to help kind of bolster that skill and then put them back in the environment and test that with the modifications and the accommodations of the classroom?
Yes, I think that's where we start adding people to our team if it feels outside of our own skill set. Some people will feel really comfortable remediating a skill or will feel like they know what to do. And some people will say it's time to get resources behind this. It's time to engage a professional. It's time to add somebody to our team who knows a little bit more about this than we do, and they can guide us. And occupational therapists, child psychologists, all of will all know from a developmental perspective how to bring a person along on that, to support and develop that skill. Scaffolding is a developmental concept in which we build our support up to the level of need of the child. We meet them where they're at by building our supports and giving them all the supports they need. And what that sometimes looks like is going back to I do and we do. Um,
Mhm.
Even though you think they should, based on their age, their size, whatever, we should, I put in quotation marks, be able to do this. Then when they get the skill or they get the, build a skill, develop, they're moving along, then we remove a level of scaffolding and we give them a little bit more opportunity to do it independently with a little less support. We just increase independence by decreasing our support. It's tricky because it does take a lot of intentionality from parents. And I can actually also entertain that there might be some people listening that might confuse scaffolding with coddling. And, they are saying, we're doing too much. We're being too gentle. My parents were just tough, and that's how I developed it. The school of hard knocks is definitely one way.
Yes, it
I mean,
is.
it is one way. You can learn through the school of hard knocks. And it's not often very pleasant. It oftentimes comes with some suffering and some negative messaging, limiting beliefs, and things like that. And so, yes, I agree that there is an approach that was taken and has been taken where you'll just figure it out. There's a gentler way, and that is, to support your child at their developmental level, meeting them where they're at, putting your resources behind them. If you don't know how, finding out somebody who does. And I think for the whole child development, that is the approach that I would recommend.
Mm. Yes, I agree. Being a clinical social worker for 20 years, the school of hard knocks comes with a pretty hefty therapy bill for that child later on down the road. So I like the idea of just accepting your reality, accepting the reality of where your child is with their executive function skills. And like you said, meeting them where they are without any shame. And then bringing someone on board. I mean, time goes fast, right? We just graduated our oldest from high school on Saturday, and it's like you don't have a lot of time to waste if you feel like your kid may be lagging in a particular skill. So it's best to just kind of wave the white flag and surrender and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I've tried my best, but now I need some help here. So is it best for a parent to start with just their pediatrician and say, hey, I've noticed these certain things. What do you recommend? Or can you skip the pediatrician and go straight to an evaluation with an occupational therapist? Where would a parent start if they thought, oh, this is resonating with me and we need to do something?
Yeah, I always recommend open communication with your healthcare provider. And nothing really can substitute for good healthcare provision and their recommendations to you. And, in the end, your decisions should be prioritized and made in healthcare provision. And if you're collecting information about what's going on, like doing your own skills profile, as we talked about, and starting to learn what are executive function skills so that you have language to communicate with healthcare providers about it, um, I would definitely recommend adding someone to your team. You don't have to wait for your healthcare provider to recommend that. I just think they should be brought into the loop to say, hey, I have this concern. I'm going to look for some support outside of our family to make sure that we've got this covered, that we're taking advantage of this developmental period, that we're honoring their development and their social emotional growth. We're noticing it's affecting their confidence or their self-esteem, or they seem, to be really struggling, and we don't want to have that happen. So I definitely recommend like a whole team kind of approach. But you don't have to wait for someone to recommend, occupational therapy. You can go seek that out on your own. But I definitely would keep those lines of communication open.
Great advice. Also, does insurance cover occupational therapy, or are there situations where they would say, we absolutely are not going to pay for this. It's not warranted.
No, I mean, insurance covers occupational therapy, it covers child psychology. It depends on your specific policy, of course. And different policies have different amounts of coverage. If you seek private occupational therapy or private pay, which a lot of people are starting to seek for different things, for mental health support, for physical therapy, for occupational therapy. Oftentimes, you can also still use your insurance, but you use it in an out of network rate. So you have a lot of opportunities or options, I guess I should say, and you can just call your health insurance company and just kind of say, "Hey, what are my coverages for this particular person in my family specific to occupational therapy or child psychology?" and find out. And you can kind of lean in the direction that is most covered or most financially feasible for your family.
Hmm. Awesome. I know when I was in private practice, if a person had an insurance that I didn't accept or I didn't take, I could offer them a super bill. And so it would have all the codes for them to submit it to their insurance, and then they could get reimbursed for and put it on their health savings account or a credit card and then get it reimbursed from an insurance company. So sometimes I
Yeah.
just think as parents, we're left in the dark about how to handle these private pay bills and the insurance, and so it's nice to just have, somebody tell you, "Hey, just call them up,
Mhm.
ask, find out what's available, and then, get the services that you need for yourself or your kiddos."
Yes, thank you for bringing up the super bill. That is the way you get the out of network reimbursement. And we've chosen our own physical therapy provider for our family. And the nice thing about going out of network for us is there's no copay. So you don't have to pay that copay visit every visit. And so, like for our insurance, for example, physical therapy has like a $40 per visit copay. Um, so we get reimbursed at a percentage of what they charge, but we don't have that $40 cost. So that ends up leveling the playing field a little bit. And I do try to walk people through, and they reach out about getting services. Like, this is what you do. You call your insurance, you find out what your out of network benefit is, you submit the super bill, you get reimbursed. So also, if you'd like to use your insurance and stay in network, there's so many great providers typically, and people are really happy to help support you.
Yes, I think that's why your advice about, starting with your healthcare provider, because obviously if you're with that provider for your child, that pediatrician, you must trust them and believe that they have your child's best interest at heart. And so asking them, who do you recommend? Who would you send your own child to, or your sister, your brother to, is always a good starting point, because it can be overwhelming to just look at a list of providers or Google occupational therapist in Denver. And then it's just like, how do I know what their stance is or their approach? And so I like that idea of going back to the basics of the pediatrician, or calling the occupational therapist or emailing them directly and saying, hey, if we go with you, how do we work this out with our insurance? And it sounds like you're one of those people that is like willing to take the time to walk people through the ins and outs of making it work for their insurance, and kind of you're doing what we talked about. You're saying, I'll do it, and then I want you to go do it. And then next time something comes up, you can do it on your own. I do it, we do it, you do it. I love it.
So see, we could take this process to everything.
Exactly. Exactly. This is great. Carrie, you have a fantastic, super helpful, visually pleasant website that I want to be sure that people visit, because you have resources in there. You mentioned that there are games families can play together that naturally bolster these executive function skills. Those are listed on your website with links to order them right there. And then also, there are certain home, what do you call them? Not home decor pieces, but like furniture and different tools that you could use in your home, different chairs and swings and different things like that that you feel are helpful for kiddos that have sensory processing disorders and things like that, that you recommend as well.
Yep. Yep. That's all there. And I am specialized in sensory processing and integration. And we didn't really touch on that today, but it is a part and parcel of this conversation as well. And there, again, in the Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap. So maybe next time we can have a conversation about that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, one of the things that we are just so grateful for you and your husband Tim for is just your contribution to our organization, Families of Character. You have been great supporters and have donated to Families of Character on a monthly basis for a really long time. And I'm just wondering what, with your background in occupational therapy, and Tim, he's in finance, right?
It's in medical
Accounting?
device sales.
Medical device sales. Okay, okay. What kind of got you interested in Families of Character and what we're doing for families that compelled you to donate for so long?
So I think it is part of this bigger picture that we talked about, is like building out resourcing around your family. And so we heard the founder, Steve Markle, speak and talk really personally about how building character within his focus on building character within his own family was so supportive to the development and outcomes in his family. And so we decided to join and do Families of Character. We did it years and years ago in a small group setting where we would focus on a different character a month and try to work on developing it. And that intentional type of work is really supportive to, like, I guess, intentionally growing your family in the direction you want to grow in, but also feeling like there's a support network behind you and resourcing behind you. And if you do it with others or on your own, depending on what appeals to you, there's things to go to look at to guide you when you have questions or when you come up against a pain point. And so for us, it was so formative for our family, and we loved it, and we felt like it really supported and resourced our family really well, that we wanted to make sure that it was perpetually available to other families, because I know how intentional you've been about making it more widely available. And so we just really wanted to support that.
Well, we certainly appreciate it. Your donations, your support, being willing to share your expertise with our community has all really blessed us. And we want to continue to really share this message about how you can unify your family in just 3 easy steps a week. Just when we talk about executive functioning and planning for the future, and being able to think out 3 days, 5 days, to next month, to the next season in family life, that's really what we're about at Families of Character, is getting our kids on board once a week, having a family huddle to connect on a consistent basis where we show up for each other and build that culture of integrity. We're going to be here for you every Sunday at 6:30 in the living room. We're going to have this family huddle, and we're going to communicate about the calendar and teach you how to use a digital calendar and to set reminders and use these tools to help bolster these executive functioning skills. And then also, like you said, focusing around one goal as a unified family, one character strength or one virtue that you hone in on, getting out the door on time this week, or not interrupting, waiting your turn when someone's speaking. Like, when you do that as a family, it just builds such this sense of identity. And I think in our culture today, when identity is one of those things that's in question, kids are craving, like, what does the Schmitt family stand for? Team Langdon, what is our thing? What are things that we'll do and we won't do? And what are we going to say yes to and to no to? And so just the fact that you and Tim and your family have supported our organization and are on board with this, and want to continue to share this with other people and make it accessible, is just something that we're very, very grateful for. So
Well, thank you. Thank you for all the resources you provide, because it's supporting families, and we really, really appreciate that.
absolutely. We're going to keep on doing it because fighting for the family is so worth it every day. I'm grateful for this position, and it's it's not easy, but it's worth it. And I think anything that's difficult is worth it in the end. So we're going to continue to help bolster marriages and give parents the skills they need to raise great kids of character and to help kids function at their highest level, like you were talking about. So, Carrie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You guys visit her website. We'd be remiss to leave that out. So tell us the website they can visit and spell it out for them.
Okay, it's Carrie Schmitt, OTD. It's CarrieSchmitt, that's double T, OTD, or occupational therapy doctor, .com.
Awesome. That's linked in our show notes, so you can scroll down in the episode notes and click on her link to check out her website. She's also given us a great printable to include in our weekly email newsletter. So if you are not on our list to receive our weekly email newsletters on Tuesday, please go to familiesofcharacter.com and hit the subscribe button up top and enter in your name and email, and you will start getting all the free resources that we send out. Guys, there's always room for growth in developing these awesome life skills. So don't wait any longer. Access the resources that you need. Get in touch with your healthcare provider, and get a team around you that can help you with the skills that your kids and you need to really, truly thrive in family life. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on another episode of the Families of Character Show real soon.